So we'll talk about a couple of recent projects that my team at NPR was working on that are very exciting. Um, and really, I think it's also in the origin of those projects that we can talk about. We get called a lot to solve problems, right? So product development and project management is not always, starting from something new and shiny and an idea. Sometimes you get a problem dumped on your desk that is a challenge. And so knowing how to pull apart that project or pull apart that problem so that you can get to the root cause is really important. And as a product developer, you need to look at root cause analysis as an important part of that process. So we got a call one night. I was getting on a train from Washington, D.C. to Boston because there was a tornado warning and my plane had been canceled. So we had to take a train home. But in getting on the train, I got a phone call, said, "Hey, Jeff, I've got a problem. Can you help me?" And it was from our friends at Boston Harbor Angels. It's good also to have a network of relationships and what I'd call a village to help you solve those problems. And so my village reached out to me and they said, "Jeff, I've got a problem. What do I do?" And the problem was that a company that worked on diagnostic technology it was really a big piece of capex equipment that was diagnosing macular degeneration, and macular degeneration affects a lot of people, but if it's not treated in time, it can cause blindness. So it's a problem. But they had a large piece of equipment the size of a laser printer, and you would put your eyes up to it like a fundus camera, and you would sit in the dark for 20 minutes, and it would do a test, and it would check to see how your eyes adjust to darkness and light. And in doing so, it could diagnose macular degeneration 3 years before a doctor would typically see it. So it's a cutting edge technology already. But the problem was that they had 200 of these devices installed in the field, and in the middle of a 20-minute test, the machine was just turning off. It was just shutting down. And what was happening was there was a communication problem between the hardware and the software, and there was a bug in there, and they didn't know how to untangle it. And so they called us. By the next day, we had a proposal on their desk to fix it. And by the end of the afternoon, they had agreed that was the best path forward. So we flew their equipment back down to DC. We took it apart. We looked through it. We looked through the code. We found the problem, and within a week, we had solved the issue. We gave them a patch in the form of a USB, stick that they could put in every one of their machines and patch the code. So they were very impressed with the way that we responded to their problem. And as a result, they invited us to participate in a really big project. And that really big project was for this company called Maculogics. Maculogics is a small company. They had probably about 60 people at the time. And they wanted to take that big piece of CapEx equipment and put it into a virtual reality headset form factor. So over the course of 16 months, we did that, and we put it into something that's about the size of an Oculus Quest, but much more comfortable to wear. It fits the universal size from the 5% female in anatomy to a 95% male. One size fits all. It seals out the eyes and does complete darkness while you're in a ambient light environment. And the little cameras that adjust to look at your eye go up and down and left and right and in and out and focus on that spot. And then there's an AI platform that walks you through the test as the patient. So you can put this on a patient, you can walk out of the room, and 20 minutes later come back and the test is done. And that was done from a clean sheet of paper in about 16 months and on the market. And today it was recognized as the Platinum A-Prime Medical Design Excellence Award for 2020. And I can't take credit for that, but that was my team, our product design director, Craig Mock, and an entire team of about 12 engineers working on that nonstop for about 15 months and then launching it and getting it on the market. So those are the type of things that we did at NPR. And now, I'm charged with doing the same thing at Kohler Company. So it looks like we're getting some questions coming in. I want to take those and see what people have questions about.
I can get them to ask you directly, which gives them a chance to interact with you as well.
Yeah, no, this is great.
Yeah, so please go ahead, Krishnan. You can unmute and ask a question.
Yeah, good evening, sir.
Good
evening,
evening.
Mr. Jeffrey. And I would like to know what is the business model for acquiring customers and how will it impact your product design in medical device or healthcare industry?
So that's a good question. Are you talking about from the beginning when we're designing a new product, or are you talking about after the product is on the market?
Yeah, it could be right from the design itself and then in the market, because ultimately we need to have more customers and more satisfied customers.
Sure. So that's a great question. So I'm going to share with you a couple secret weapons. So it's really important, extremely important, that in the beginning when you're ideating and coming up with a concept, that you're thinking about your stakeholders, right? So we talk a lot about stakeholders and value proposition design for those stakeholders. And there's a great book and company called Strategizer. They've got if you look it up, it's STRATEGYZER. And the Strategizer series is produced by Wiley, Wiley. And they've got this great book called Value Proposition Design. And basically it talks about how to create services that customers will love. And in order to do that, we really need to look at what are those customers trying to accomplish, and how are you going to help them do the jobs that they need to do, right? So we look at the jobs that a customer needs to complete, right? Whether it's taking care of themselves, taking care of a loved one as a caregiver, taking care of a child that's sick, taking care of a parent that's aging. And we look at the things that they have to complete during their day as that stakeholder. And in doing so, we find ways that we can alleviate pains that they have in doing those jobs and create gains for them so they can do that job faster, less expensively, more efficiently, in less time. And we provide some gain for them. And then we put that together in a kind of value proposition statement that says our product helps, mothers to care for their infants by, reducing, some pain and increasing some gain for them, unlike the current standard of care. So we make sure that from the very beginning, we're able to deliver value that beats the competitive products in those spaces, and also delivers some kind of advantage for that stakeholder. So stakeholder mapping is very important. Finding out what the jobs that all the stakeholders that are going to touch that product over the course of its life have in that product, and then identifying who the key stakeholder is, and then tailoring those value propositions for that key stakeholder. And if you keep that at top of mind, it's hard to miss, right? You want to make sure that you're able to deliver as much value to all the stakeholders. And in doing so, also look at the usability of it. Is it easy to use? Is it seamless? Does it fit into their lifestyle? And then, building up that product by adding value propositions that are going to be helpful to that individual. So I would recommend reading through, this book on value proposition design. I can send Muthu a couple of workshops that are pre-recorded that would be helpful to understand that topic in more depth. But designing excellent value propositions is an important part of acquiring those customers, even when they don't know what they need, right? So would that is that helpful?
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. That's a very important insight you gave me, is the mapping the stakeholders. That's a great thing. And I have a quick question on the question is, how will you validate the product design in healthcare industry, especially in terms of?
Yeah, so there's obviously there's qualifications that you need to go through with every element of design, whether it's making sure you have a 1345 development process that's certified, and that's important. When it's designing connected devices, it might be 62304. Different guidances that are out there that help you to understand what the criteria are and the requirements for that device, how it's supposed to interact, what it's supposed to, not interfere with, and also, having a team of testing engineers that can then rigorously make sure that it meets those standards. And, in doing so, I had a great team at NPR. Our director of product testing had been there for 25 years. And so I would rely on my engineers and my team to take care of the validation and the verification process that says, here are the system requirements that we're looking to build into this, and then test that system against those requirements and make sure that they meet those standards. You're talking UL for electronics and qualifying electronics, but also, we were making biologics and regenerative medicine plays and implantables and things like that. So these devices are not going to cause any harm or interact with tissue that's not compatible. So biocompatibility is really important for any of those devices that are going to be touching a human or used in a human. But there's lots of different ways to do that. So usability is also a big factor that needs to be considered in forming the great products that you make. Up front, it's really important to do a formative usability study, which means you're using your prototype, you're giving it to users, and understanding the challenges that user might have in using your product, because you want to make it so that it's simple and easy to use. And that formative study, that you're collecting all your input as to how it's being used. Is it used with one hand or two hands, or is it a requirement that it's used with one hand? I'll show you another example. We work a lot in hemostats, and so hemostats are an important life-saving technology in the field for the military. I keep as somebody that works in that space, I keep them in my bag and they're packed at all times. But not that I'm planning on needing it, but this is a device that we designed for stopping bleeding in patients, either gunshot wounds or lacerations from knives, or things that would happen in battle, or could happen as a first responder. And so the goal was to have something that could close off bleeding and stop things that are more closer to the extremities, and things that wouldn't be necessarily able to stop by a tourniquet. And so the use case was soldiers in the field. They take on gunfire, they're shot. They need to be able to rip something off of their pack, and with one hand, they need to be able to arm it. So I don't know if you can see my camera here. Can everybody see this?
Yes, we can.
Great. So this is a hair clip. If you're familiar with a hair clip on steroids, this hair clip pulls off a pack. You can take it out with one hand. You can arm it, and then it locks onto a gunshot wound. You just clamp it on, and it stops the bleeding as the hematoma forms under the skin. So this, when we first got our hands on it, was not easy to use. It didn't load with one hand. You couldn't take it out of the package with one hand. And it was kind of clunky. There was a big heavy metal clutch that went through it. And so we had to redesign it with the users in mind, not only that individual that's just been shot, but also the surgeon that had to take it off of the patient once it got to a more critical environment where they could be patched up. So things like that, where you need to consider how it's going to be used, all the different use scenarios, that it has to be super simple and easy, and that an individual could do it themselves and arm it and drop it onto a wound while they're in shock. So it has to be simple, easy, and then the packaging had to be something that could be easily sterilized and packaged and sealed and sent out. So there were a lot of constraints on this, a lot of moving parts. And when we got this project and it came to us, what they had put together was functional. It actually had a CE marker, a certificate that it could be used in the European Union. It had FDA clearance, but it was clunky and hard to use. So just because you get a clearance on something doesn't necessarily mean that you've produced the right product. Just because it's validated doesn't necessarily mean it's the right product either. So those formative, and then at the end of your study, once you have a product and you've checked it against all those boxes in a formative study, you'd validate it with a summative study to say, did we meet all the goals of that usability and human factors that we needed to in order to be successful and have a product that's going to be adopted. So that's how we would validate those things and make sure we've met all the criteria for the requirements.
Thank you, Jeffrey, sir, for the great insight. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian.
So, anybody else has a question, please unmute and ask directly. If not, I have a question for Jeff. Okay, while we wait for them to come into questions, Jeff, now, do you think startups should make their own product development, or should they be working with others to make the product? What would be
yeah, that's a great question. So I guess the question is, it depends. It depends on how heavy the lift is, and it depends on what kind of technical challenges need to be solved. In some cases, products can be very simple, right? They can be simple and easy to design. In other cases, there could be, a system. And in system design, it's different than just having multiple different technologies working together, right? Those technologies need to be, function as a system and complete a task. And if it's a complex system, I would say keep your team small, your internal team, your startup team as small as possible. Because you're going to burn a lot of cash if you staff up and have a team that's capable of delivering that. When we develop complex systems with startup companies, I can have a team of 10 people, but maybe only the equivalent of 2 full-timers that go in and out of that project and don't necessarily burn all that customer's cash while they're working on it. So you need to find a way to manage your cash burn as you're developing those products. If all of the stakeholders on your team are partners, and there's no cash, and you're working together, and you're simply working on your own time, yeah, sure, you can have as many partners involved as possible, but that means splitting equity down the line, and that can also become a difficult conversation. If you've got 1 or 2 founders, it's much easier to part with equity. If you've got 10 founders, it can be a little bit costly and challenging to manage those relationships. But I think the best way to do it is to have a good, solid concept, and then work with a team that's been there before and done that before, so that you can avoid a lot of costly mistakes as you go down that path. I think that it can be beneficial to work with an outside partner that understands the process. And if it's your first time doing it, it can also help you to avoid a lot of challenges. But that being said, I like a program called iCore. In the US, there's a program called iCore, and iCore challenges those entrepreneurs to go out there, and before you start developing a product, or before you start developing a solution, ask questions. Find all those stakeholders, find 100 different people, and interview them about the problems that they face trying to complete that we talked about before. If there's tasks that need to be completed, find the people that are doing them every day and ask them questions about their life, about the challenges they face while completing those tasks as that stakeholder. And you're going to find that your initial concepts might not have held water. You might have had some gaps or some blind spots that you didn't think about that need to be considered. And then after you've interviewed 100 people, then go and develop your concept in a more robust way. So that's one way in which we can use a village or those around us in order to be successful in a small team to bring a concept up. And that just takes a lot of questions, a lot of really pointed answers, and being able to be adaptable and flexible. But I've seen a 1 and 2 man team, or a 1 and 2 person team do just as well as a team of 10. So it depends. I guess that's the question.
Okay, cool. There's a question in the chat box. Deepak, you can unmute and talk to Jeff directly.
Yeah. Hello. Hi. This is regarding the value proposition, the earlier answer that you had given. Firstly, it was like really really great. But one query came up in my mind is that if one takes care to get a good value proposition and has a good product that lives up to the promise, where could they still fail? Are there examples that that still failed even with both things correct? Something that they did wrong that you could warn us about as an example? Yeah.
A great question, Deepak. For every product that I've seen that's successful, there's another half a dozen products that have failed, right? And I'd say the most important thing of product development, the most important element of that is people, and managing those relationships can also sink a ship. So that's one thing, right? Is the people challenge. But even if you have a product that's great, it hits all the value propositions. There's technical challenges that come up, right? And I would challenge you also to tackle the big technical challenges first, right? So recently we had a product that we were working on, and it was a chemistry play, and the play was that it was a breathalyzer that you would breathe into, and it would tell you your blood glucose, and it correlated the acetone in your breath to blood glucose. And from the beginning, we were looking for data from the scientists, from the chemists, to say, here's the correlation, and this is how we know that it's going to work. And they said, yeah, we've got that. It correlates, and here's some data points. And they were loosely correlated, but not necessarily as tight as we would need them to be. And they had a benchtop model prototype that was a works-like prototype. And they were able to get some decent data, but there were a lot of things that interfered with it. And as a result, they wanted to take that big desktop model where you breathe into a large bell, and it was, you'd fill it up with breath condensate, and then you would measure with optical coherence whether or not the signal of a photon would get through that exhaled breath condensate, and what came out the other side was able to be measured and give you a readout of acetone in the breath. But the correlations just weren't very tight, and they wanted to push forward with miniaturizing that device and putting it into a handheld so that you could breathe into a smaller tube that might be this size and get that same breath condensate on the inside of that, and then beam through some photons and capture it on a sensor on the other side. But if you don't have the original working perfectly and have a great correlation of values, you can't miniaturize it. It's not going to work any better if you miniaturize it. So really take your time to prove out those data points and get good corresponding data in a benchtop model before you try to change the form factor. Start with the end in mind, but make sure you solve the big technical challenges first. And in doing so, we also asked them to build a test model so that we could calibrate against that test model before we started going down into the smaller miniaturized device. But they pushed forward. They kept struggling with it. Results on the smaller miniaturized model as they were getting on the benchtop model, but those data points did not correlate, and it ended up being a failure. So I think there's lessons in there, but I think in the beginning you really want to go slow to go fast. You want to prove out those technical challenges have been solved before you get concerned with product design or the ergonomics of something or how you hold it or all those different things. It's nice to think about those things, but you really have to prove the technology works first. Because if you don't have a technology that works, you don't have a product that works, and ultimately that crashed and burned. So promising technology, if it could have been realized, it would have helped a lot of diabetics not have to prick their finger and get blood on a glucometer on a regular basis throughout their day. And it would have solved a lot of problems. It hit on all the value propositions if it in fact worked. But they didn't take their time to prove out the technology before going into a product development sprint, and ultimately burn their cash and their investors too. And that was unfortunate.
We have a couple of more questions. So I think Muthukrishnan, you can go ahead and ask Jeff the question directly.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm trying to develop a product that could cause linear displacements, and it is also in like a microstructure scale.
Okay.
So this I am get inspired from this ultrastructure of our muscle fibers. So they make these muscle fibers make linear contractions with response to electric impulses. So
Okay.
are there industries working in such field to develop microstructures that gets activated by means of electrical impulses? Can you give any hints?
Thanks, Muthu Krishna. I think you're being intentionally vague on the area where this is going to be used, but I don't want to push on, or ask too many questions because I know this can be sensitive. So I can tell you that in a lot of different products that we've developed, we need to also prove that they work in the body, right? That they're going to work as an implant, they're going to work in a particular area. And so developing a test bed where we could, and to answer the earlier question, to validate that technology will work and it will have a life that's, it lasts at least for a year, and then can be replaced. These things are important, right? So when we're working with, let's say, for example, it was a silicone implant that went in the tongue to hold down the tongue for sleep apnea, right? When people sleep and they put their head back and their tongue slides back into the space and can cause snoring, right? It can cause sleep apnea. So we wanted to anchor the tongue on the bottom of the mouth and put a silicone anchor into a piece of soft tissue under the tongue. And so we did that, but in order to validate that it would work in that environment for the course of a year, we had to build a tongue. We had to build a test bed that had small actuators that would pull left and right and up and down in 6 degrees of freedom, all the different ways in which the tongue moves. And we had to build that little structure and then put the implant in a device and then move it around for the equivalent of a year in about a month, in order to give us the data to say, yes, this would stand up to those constraints. It would be able to be used for at least a year. And we had to put it in a saline bath as well. So it had to mimic the chemistry of the mouth. So anyway, that was one example of these little micro electro mechanical systems that would influence our validation of the device. But there's lots of different technologies that are being formed in that way to either retrain muscles, but from my experience, they've been larger, more rehabilitative exoskeletons. I haven't seen too much outside of a test product or a validation platform in those small micro-mechanical systems. But interested in learning more if you want to share any other information about how that's being used and what it's being used for.
Mr. Krishnan, you want to do a follow-on question on that, or you are okay?
I'm okay with this now.
Okay.
Sumitra, your next question.
Thank you, sir. So my question is, what is the difference between product development and product management, sir?
Thanks, Sumitra. That's a great question. So the way that I think of it is product development is everything that happens between coming up with a great concept and getting it into a place where it can be tested in the field and kind of used as a working product that can be sold. And the product development process kind of takes into account the product manager and the product management of that device or technology. But product management really goes from the very beginning all the way through the end life of that product, right? And how is it going to get to market? What channel we're going to use? How is it going to be made? Product development. There's an overlap, right? In a Venn diagram, there's a lot of connected parts of it. And product development and engineering should work hand in hand with product management. But product management really takes that and looks at what it's going to do in the market, what it's going to do with the customer, how are they going to get it to the customer, how is it going to be made, how is the service attached to it going to be managed. There's a whole element of different things that have to be managed after that product is realized. So I think it's really about the life cycle of the product. Very early on, it's mostly product development. It starts in the product management category. But it's an art form as well, and product management is something that I've spent time on earlier in my career, but I've really been focused on product development for the last 12 years. and that means working with scientists and IP attorneys and testing engineers to make sure that it would do what we wanted it to do in the market. From there, we would hand it to product managers who would then get it into the market, get it into the hands of those customers, and take it from that point in its life cycle. Does that make sense, Sumitra?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And thank you for answering my question, sir.
Thanks for the question.
And Sumitra was one of the ones who was coordinating with you.
Oh, excellent. Hey, Sumitra, how are you?
Fine, sir. Fine, sir.
Good.
And next question, Geeta has put it up. Geeta, please go ahead. Yeah, you are on mute, Geeta, or do you want me to read the question out? Okay, I will read it.
1 minute, sir. I'm done.
Okay, go for it.
Yes, sir. My question is, how long a startup can invest to develop a product? Like, how long a startup can research on the product development and take it to market? How much time a startup can invest? Your suggestions, sir, on it.
That's a great question. So I know I know entrepreneurs that have done it in a very short amount of time, and I know entrepreneurs that take a long time, right? So the answer is it varies dramatically, right? There's some entrepreneurs that I've been following for 5 years, and they're just now manufacturing and getting on the market, and they have sales and they've gotten to a couple $1 million in sales after 6 years, 7 years, 8 years of development. In other cases, I have clients that have been on the market after only a year or a year and a half or 2 years. So I think it's really important that you understand from the complexity of the technology what you're in for, right? Because what seems easy and it can take a short amount of time can take years of your life, and you need to be so committed to that mission that you're not willing to quit.
Yes.
I think it's also important to understand that sometimes it is okay to fail, right? Failing is part of developing a great product. And for all the great products that you see, those same entrepreneurs have failed several times before that. So I think it's important to be adaptable. It's important to be realistic. And it's important to understand when you've hit a wall that can't be broken through or around. And it could have to do with adoption. It could have to do with just not meeting the needs of that stakeholder. It could have to do with the technology. But you have to be willing to walk away. You have to be dedicated to it as if it's your child. At the same time, you have to be willing to admit when you failed and fail fast, and then get on to the next iteration or get on to the next idea. So I think that's a great question, but the answer is it really depends widely.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Yep.
We
Thanks,
have
Geeta.
a question on the press board by Archana. She's also another of my program managers, so she can unmute and ask you the question.
Thank you, Muthu sir. Hello, Jeffrey. My question is I'm asking from the incubator point of sight. So how do an incubator take a company in, whether the company should be in the ideation stage or at least in the proof of concept stage, or it should be in the product development stage?
So if you're getting into an incubator, you've got a pretty serious concept that you're willing to invest, a year or two of your time in, right? So, you could start in an incubator with simply an unmet need, right? If you're sponsored and you've got funding or you've got a grant or you've got, something that you're out there to solve, right? The most important thing is that you start with an unmet need, right? Whether it's in healthcare or in food and beverage or in, any other industry, aerospace, you have to find what that unmet need is. And that I-Core program that I mentioned is asking those 100 people all those different questions so that you can get to what the unmet need is. Am I solving a problem, or has that problem already been solved? I spend a lot of my time on first of a kind products that solve an unmet need for the first time or solve it much better than the existing. I'm not looking to iterate on an existing product and make a better mousetrap. I want to find a way to trap mice differently, right? Or I want to find a way that is completely hasn't been done before. So if you have an unmet need, if you have a way of solving that unmet need with something that hasn't been done before, and if you've got some kind of funding or an incubator that'll take you in, that's enough to get started. And really just becoming obsessed with that problem, obsessed with that unmet need, so that you can think of all the different ways to solve it for that stakeholder, and then pick the one that makes the most sense. But you don't necessarily need to have a proof of concept in order to get into an incubator or get into a product development stage to get into an incubator. It depends on the situation and who you're sponsored by, really. Are you putting your own money on the line, or is it something that you have a grant to go and solve a problem? And there's lots of grants out there that are available for people that are trying to solve problems. For a really bright fellow to come in and spend time at a university to solve a problem, a specific problem, because they have a certain way of thinking. But I don't think the stage is as important as identifying the need and having the resources to go and solve that problem. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you so much for the answer.
I also wanted to share one more thing with you.
Yes, please.
So in dealing with entrepreneurs on a regular basis and being an angel investor, we talk about two things, right? We want to invest in companies and technologies that we believe in, but we're really investing in the entrepreneur. And as an entrepreneur, we have a criteria for who we want to do business with as investors. And at Boston Harbor Angels, we talk a lot about the 5 H's. And the 5 H's are just a list of criteria that I check off when I meet an entrepreneur. And if they don't have these 5 H's, typically I spend my time somewhere else. And so the 5 H's are, number 1, you've got to be hungry. You've got to want this more than anything else in your life. You've got to be so dedicated to solving this problem that you're willing to risk everything to do it. Number 2, you've got to be hardworking. You need to be able to put in more time solving your problem than I'm going to put in reviewing it and developing it and doing all those other things. You've got to be dedicated to this 24 hours a day. You eat, breathe, sleep, and live in this problem all the time. You also have to be humble. Humility is an important characteristic in an entrepreneur. There's lots of people that we meet that display humility and the way they interact with people that is genuine and not self-interested. And so humility is an important element because egos can kill projects, can kill companies. Ego is the #1 reason why companies fail. It's either because people hold on to their ideas too tightly and they're not adaptable, or they just have an ego that they can't get around. So that's a challenge. They have to be honest. Integrity is also incredibly important because as an investor, I need to know that you're being 100% honest with me so that I can assess the situation properly and then manage the situation if it goes awry, which means sharing when things go wrong. And it means, if something goes wrong, you're the first one to raise your hand and say, we've got a problem. We need to solve this. So the ego can hide those things and can protect your team from them, and that can cause problems as well. So honesty is number 4. And then also, you have to have a sense of humor. You have to be able to laugh at yourself. You have to be able to have fun, because at the end of the day, the team that you work with is going to be a family, and you're going to spend a lot of time with them. So they have to be lighthearted. They've got to be fun. It's got to be something that you want to be involved with, because if you're going to dedicate all of your time and effort and your blood, sweat, and tears into something, at the end of the day, you have to be able to laugh about it and be honest with yourself. So those are the 5 H's, and that's what we look for in an entrepreneur. And if they have them, great. If they don't, we'll coach them and we'll tell them. And if they're not coachable, that's also another reason why we might part ways. So coachability is also a really important element, and it has to do with humility. So those are the 5 H's, and I hope those are helpful.
Great, fantastic. We have another question from Selvamurthy. Selvamurthy, you can unmute and ask.
Hi, Jeffrey. So my question is, uh, in regard to the new product, we are finding it, I think, the most challenging because we'll go with non-invasive, which will not be proven clinically it is as accurate or precise. So normally we'll try to think on this Make in India strategy, wherein we'll try to come up with a product which is proven but a low cost in the market, so it will reach a n number of customers. So what is your thought on that particular idea?
So is this for a dental application where you've got a patient
Yeah,
that,
I'm looking at dental applications, also in medical applications as well. So the affordability will be a major criteria for people to go for any new technology. So if you have affordability is fulfilled, and we have a technology also in place, so people can able to go for the product, and they can able use this product in Indian market.
so so this is a chair, this is the chair side oral scanner that would compete with an X-ray, is that right?
Yeah. That's right. I'm looking at that model as well.
And so you're looking for something that would compete with the existing technology that's in the market, which is the X-ray,
Yes.
and you want to have it as a lower cost, but still give you some sense of visualization of the mouth, and that's interesting. So I think it's a good pursuit for an unmet need for lower cost opportunities. What kind of technologies are you exploring that would give you the same kind of imaging? Is it optoacoustical or what's the imaging modality?
Yeah, the technology currently in the market is of two technologies. The one is an optical scanning technology, which is there in the market.
Okay.
And second is the infrared technology is there in the market.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the second one.
So infrared rays technology, something is there in the market, which I read in the one of the
So
article.
infrared, like a near infrared spectroscopy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think there's certainly there's certainly ripe for disruption, right? That hasn't been disrupted in a long time. So I'd be interested to read a brief on it if you'd be happy to share it, and I could give you some pointed suggestions. But I'd have to take a look at what the technology is and the reasons why it would be able to compete and meet the need. But sounds compelling. Certainly, there hasn't been a whole lot of disruption in that area for a long time. And I like these different modalities of optical scanners, especially when you're looking proximal to the surface. I just don't know what it would look like, when you're attaching it or hitting bone or tooth or things like that. If you get the same kind of image quality and accuracy. It doesn't need to be 100% accurate, but if you can identify, cavities and
margins.
Yep, margins and things like that, and maybe gum health and things of that nature, I think could be very interesting. You'd also probably see a lot more of the vasculature in that space as well if you're using optical sensors and that kind of spectroscopy.
Yes.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting thoughts. Would love to see more on that.
Sure.
And the next question is from Mahesh Reddy. Can you ask both your questions, please, together? Mahesh Reddy. I think he can't unmute, so let me ask you this question.
Sure.
When to realize a startup to start down, rather sink the boat if it is in worst of product inability? What steps to be taken to sustain?
How do you patch the boat? Yeah, that's a good question. In a lot of cases, I've seen companies fail. I think you have to be 100% honest with yourself when things are not going right. You've got to have a stop button to hit and pause, and everybody on the team needs to be aware of it. There's got to be one team, kind of one mission, and when things pause like that, it's usually because there's either a technical challenge, or the validation is going poorly, or the testing is going poorly. I think sooner rather than later, you need to be able to pause, because that cash is going to keep burning, especially if you've got team members that are working on a technical problem. So steps that can be taken to pivot, to step back, and look at the problem. Again, this is why I always take a risk-based approach and try to reduce the risk in every step as we get closer and closer to the market. But that's also why going slow to go fast in the beginning and doing a good phase zero. Phase zero is usually where we take a look at all the problems we're going to face along the way. We have a good concept, and then we want to say, if we develop this, what are the challenges we're going to come into? What is the likelihood of those risks becoming realized? And how do we mitigate those if they do become realized, right? So having contingency plans for each one of those risks is important. You have to have a plan A and a plan B and a plan C. And so working through those ahead of time, when you get to a problem, you'll realize you're at a problem point. You'll recognize what the options that you laid out ahead of time to solve those problems are. And you'll also recognize which direction we need to take to correct it. So I think you can't necessarily do that in retrospect, because you need to understand what the problems are. You're going to have, blind spots and things that you come up against that you didn't think of. But you have to be willing to take a step back from everything, go back and see the things that you considered in the beginning and see what contingency plan you should be following. I'd be happy to take a look at the specific example and give you some insight, but sooner rather than later. If the boat is sinking, you can't just keep pushing on. Sheer will and persistence is not going to pay the bills there. You need to be honest with yourself and recognize why it's failing and get to the root cause.
I'll take one more question, Jeffrey, from Jyoti. Jyoti, go ahead, unmute and ask Jeffrey.
Thank you, sir. Hi, Jeffrey. So when we come up with a product that is more cost-effective or portable than the existing product, which the established hospitals already possess, they might not choose to buy this product unless and until there is some technical advantage, because they already possess this expensive established product. So do we need to consider this market as well while designing the product and improve on the technical part, or do we do that at a later stage? Thank you.
That's a good question. And if this is a medical product, I try to keep three things in mind, right? So in developing a product for especially a hospital or a surgeon or things that they've invested in CapEx equipment, it's really hard to get them to divest in that to take a less costly or less effective device. But I also think it's important to consider ways to do things more simply and ways to do things more cost effectively. And if you're aiming at a more cost effective solution, you might aim at a different type of hospital, right? There's lots of different types of hospitals. There's large, surgical centers that can invest in big pieces of CapEx equipment because they're using them all the time and they can cycle through them. But there's also smaller hospitals that don't have those resources that are looking for more cost effective examples of ways to be more efficient, ways to be more effective, and ways to spend less money on those same procedures. So I think, the stakeholders aren't always one size fits all. And you need to consider that from the beginning as you're developing that concept. But I also think retrofitting is a great way to do that. What I mean by that is retrofitting looks at older technologies that existed for a long time. They might have existed for 50 years, 100 years, but that they're now at a point that's so different from the original development that they cost a lot. They're very complicated. They're difficult to use. They're more complex. So I like to go back to the initial technology, the initial invention. I'll dig way back in the patent information to find what was the first patent in this space. And then I'll simply add a couple of complementing new technologies to that simple design and come up with a cost-effective solution that does the job, that accomplishes the task for that stakeholder, but at a much less costly point. So I think there's places for very expensive technologies and there's places for very inexpensive technologies, but it depends on who that stakeholder is, and not all hospitals are going to be the same. But I think, you need to explore that in talking with purchasing and talking with the hospitals and what's important to them. So what I keep in mind also is something we call the triple aim. When the United States passed the Affordable Care Act, it also put in place a lens through which we can look at new technologies as we're developing and adopting them. And that lens, the triple aim, looks at three characteristics of healthcare. It looks at the patient experience, population health, and then the cost of that technology. And so if we can reduce the cost, if we can increase the patient experience and get a better outcome, and if we can also address population health and a large group of people that are going to benefit from this technology being more effective or less costly, then I think that you've hit the right mark. But it's got to do all three of those things. It doesn't necessarily need to have more bells and whistles, but it needs to be just as effective, if not more effective, than the current standard of care. And so if you're competing, there's always place in the market for number 2 and number 3 and number 4 and number 5. But I think you need to look at, what is it that you're really aiming at? Are you looking to provide a more cost-effective technology that does just as well? Or are you looking to, provide a more cost-effective technology that provides a better outcome, that provides less cost, that actually helps more people and allows that surgeon or doctor or hospital to provide care for more people? So I think that's one way I'd look at that challenge.
Okay, great, Jeff. Thank you so much for being here. And it's extremely early in the morning out there, and very glad to come online. We always upload this on the YouTube channel, so I hope that's okay with you. For those
Sure.
who couldn't, to just as it's all about learning, so we usually upload it with your permission. And I must thank you for being here with us and patiently answering all those questions. And it was very, very useful. And we look forward to having you to do some mentoring as well when you settle down in your new environment.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Muthu.
Absolutely. And I must thank Pajista, Sumitra, and Archana for being in the back, getting it all organized for the day. So I'll talk to you soon. You take care, and God bless.
Thank you so much for having me, Muthu. It was nice to speak with you all. I hope I answered your questions, and feel free to email me if you have any other questions. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and stay in touch. But thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, take care, and bye-bye, and stay
Take
safe.
care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.